girlfriend of 4 years that I was planning proposing to flushed away her future with me by sleeping with a bunch of guys and partying away her savings. Part 2. Part 1 is here. Sorry that Part 2 has taken so long to put out, but life has been busy. First, the two things I get in the comments the most is advice, but seeing as this was over a year ago, it's moot at this point. Second is if I told her brother about the possibility of his newborn not being his. I put a letter in his mailbox before I left the town. I recently found out that he got a paternity test and the kid is not his. Not sure if it was my letter or not. With all that out of the way, I guess I will go on with the story. My job started back up right after the last part of my story. So I threw myself into work. My career is very feast and famine. So in the spring I can work as much as I want. The next 2 weeks I worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. To keep all that went down from my mind. The only time I saw or talked to Callie was when I went to go repair her mom's door. I would only answer with as little as possible and try to not show her how hurt I was. Of course she begged me to get back with her, but I was done. That doesn't mean she wasn't blowing up my phone with calls and texts. I ignored them all. After those 2 weeks I decided to take Sundays off as I was invited to a wedding. The wedding was really good, even though I couldn't shake the thought of how I was planning on proposing to Callie. So even though it was a really good time, it was bittersweet. I did meet a woman there. She had just left the city because she got out of a bad relationship. We ended up helping each other immensely. For the rest of this story we will call her Angel. The next Saturday after the wedding I decided to go to my friend's house after work. We had a few and I told him everything right away. After regaling him with what was basically the original Reddit post, he looks me in the eye and says, "Well, this will be a lot easier to tell you." Then I reply, "Tell me what?" He then proceeds to tell me about his Christmas party. For some background, I had let him take her to his Christmas party because he is a close friend and she was what I thought was a loyal girlfriend. The way he told it was that Callie got super drunk and went to some random dude's room that night. Awesome guess, that makes 6, but at this point does one more even matter? I asked him why he hadn't told me back in December when it happened. He said it was something he didn't want to do over the phone. I get that, but it would have maybe saved me a lot of trouble, but he didn't know what I was going through. You would think this would be the end of my story, but it is not. Callie's mom starts calling me to see if I knew where she was because she was disappearing for days at a time. Now I was still messed up and didn't actually want anything bad to happen to her. I started answering her calls again. It was a mistake. I think maybe just doing the straight block is probably the best course, but I have always been on good terms with my exes. It was kind of a point of pride for me. She was in a bad spot, not going to work, drinking with drugs, blowing through her savings. Just a total downward spiral. I still had love for her even after all that went down, so I tried to help her get better. I would talk with her and bring her back to her mom's a few times. I thought it was cool with trying to help, but then the spa weekend I was going to propose to her came upon me. I had already spent $2,000 for the weekend with no refund, so I went alone. It was so depressing. Spas are not really my thing. I also couldn't get the thought out of my head that someone I loved would rather throw away their life than be with me. Think because I started letting her back in my life just to witness her become a worthless human instead of ignoring her, those thoughts started to swirl in my brainbox. Needless to say, when I got back for the weekend I was in a bad spot. I ended up having to take a week off work from how depressed and suicidal I was. During that time Angel and I talked a lot. She had me realize that letting her back in my life was a super bad decision. After that week, anytime she would call or text I would just tell her to off or not answer. Me and Angel became much closer too, hanging IRL sometimes as well. She lived 2 towns over, so we could not see each other as much as we wanted to. One thing led to another and we started seeing one another. Just casually, as I still planned on moving and was not quite ready for someone in my life. It all went well for about 2 months, but the weaseled her way back into my life. I had stopped receiving any calls or messages from Callie for a month, so I figured she moved on. Or died out of the blue one day. However, I get a text from her reading that she is in awe now. That she needs to apologize for everything as it is one of the steps. For context, my dad went to awe and that is how he became part of my life again after many years of not knowing him. Unfortunately for me, she knew that. She asked to meet and I said yes. She said all the right words and gave what at the time seemed like a sincere apology. I told her that I was still really upset but was happy she was getting the help she needed. Callie asked if she could call me for support, and like the true idiot of this grand tale I said okay. I told Angel about it later in the evening. She was upset. She explained that she was just using me again, that she didn't want to deal with how I was back 2 months ago and she was uncomfortable with the whole situation. I explained about my dad, how I can not just let someone working to get better not succeed when I could have helped them. Angel said she understood, to do what I felt I needed to do but to at least try to keep some distance. Spoiler for what's ahead, you know how she said she was in awe? Well, in the words of Tyler the Creator, that was a lie. At first she would just send a few texts here and there. Then calls started to come in a few weeks later. I would try to support her emotionally but it started to get weird cause she basically started to talk to me about her new boyfriend Eric. I found it weird because I would never mention Angel. Callie knew I had someone in my life and she would ask about her but I told her it was none of her business. Everything was going fine more or less until Callie told me Eric was her. I knew of the guy through friends of friends but did not really know him. One night she calls me saying she is terrified that he was going to assault her, begging me to pick her up to hide at my house. I get there and she is drunk out of her mind. I thought she must have fallen off the wagon. I say I thought you stopped drinking. All she could reply with was please hide me, he will hurt me again. So I took her to my house to help her out. She kept slamming drinks and started trying to sleep with me. I told her there was no way that was happening. We both have other people we are seeing and that there was no way I would get with her again. She cried but let it be. The next day I had to go to work so I left her there. When I got back she had ordered more booze and was off her, again. Angel called after work wanting to know if she could come spend the night. I told her she could but that Callie was hiding from her boyfriend at my house. Angel got pissed. I totally understand why. She called me a idiot and hung up on me. Callie, watching me on the phone, starts hitting on me as soon as the call was done. I got pissed and told her again that there was no way that would happen so she went to call her new abusive boyfriend to pick her up. I made her hang up telling her I didn't want him in my house. So I drove her home so she could get back with him. What a show. Me and Angel make up later in the week. Callie stops calling for a while. My life seems to get better yet again for another couple weeks. Of course it did not last. One weekend, while me and Angel are hanging out, Callie calls again, crying asking for me to come over because she was afraid her new guy was going to beat her again. I told her Angel was over and the last time I saw her it was not a good time. Angel on the other hand said we should as she got out of an abusive relationship and couldn't have it on her conscience that we could protect her. So we went over and her original AP Joe was already there. I was blown away that she would invite us over while he was there. She was drunk as a skunk. So I finally had a sit down with Joe. He starts out by apologizing to me about him hooking up with her while we were still a thing. He tells me that he knows how I felt because now she has been seeing him and sleeping with Eric. I say they had only been together for a few months and me and her had been together for years. I mentioned to him that I think it was very cowardly of him to not confess when I messaged him months ago if they were hooking up. He said Callie begged him to not let me know and that he was so in love with her that he would just do anything she said. At that point I just pitied him, as Joe was where I was last winter. I tell him I should actually thank him because he helped me dodge a bullet. Later in the evening Callie tries to convince me and Angel to have a with her. Of course we decline. That night was all types of strange. After that night I started not taking calls or messages again. Too much drama being in her whirlwind of insanity. I realized too that she never stopped drinking. She lied so she can have me back in her life. It was just low using the knowledge of my father against me. So I don't talk to her again till after I leave the town we lived in. The rest of that year I just hung with Angel. We were sad to let each other go but we have remained friends to this day. That winter I moved in with friends that lived not too far from the island off the coast of the province I live. My goal was to try and find employment on that island once work started back up in the spring. Living with my friends was so healing. All I did was walk my doggo in the bush. Full on zen. Before I moved to the island for work I received a message from Callie. She informs me that she is on the same island I plan to move to, trying to get sober again. WTF, I go out there anyway because it is a very big island. Turns out where I ended up in my RV on the island is like a 3-hour drive from where she is. I lived in my RV and found a job that pays substantially more than my last one. I got back into some hobbies that I had been out of for some time and met a lot of awesome people. A month into living on the island Callie gets a hold of me asking if I can give her a ride to the ferry to get back to her town. I was going to the mainland anyway for a concert so I told her I could. I really just wanted her off my island, my new home. That's probably why I agreed. I pick her up and start taking her to the ferry. As soon as she gets in, she begs me to pick up liquor. Like WTF, you came here to get sober and you want to drink as soon as you are not isolated in your mom's friend's cabin? I refuse, telling her it is my car and I don't have to do anything. She complains the whole time. As she does, all I can think is, how were you ever in love with this pathetic creature? We arrived at the ferry. Turns out I have to wait an extra sailing for a drive-on. Callie decides she cannot wait, so inquires if I would be upset if she just does a walk-on. I assure her that I would not mind one bit. In truth, I was relieved that I would not have to spend more time with her. I knew more than ever at that moment, I would never want anything to do with her ever again. My life is amazing now. I haven't been this happy in probably 9 years. So I am telling this story as a guide on what not to do. It also serves to let people know that you will recover from the hurt and there is a light at the end of the tunnel.